Welcome back to the Max Out Show, where I'm joined today by the Zen Priest, mindfulness teacher, and executive coach, Marc Lesser. After living in a monastery for 10 years, Marc has gone on to lead world-renowned programs on mindfulness and meditation around the globe in companies like Google to help people bring the Zen mindset to work and to life. And so on this episode, we dive deep into the practices of mindful leaders, how to approach goal setting in the right way, and what working in a Zen kitchen taught Marc about life. So I had a great time shooting this episode. Let's dive right in. Super excited for this, and there's so many great things we're going to talk about, including empathy, leadership skills, emotional intelligence, mindfulness. But I also want to talk a little bit about your own personal story, because I think there's so many cool insights and lessons that we can all draw from, including working in a Zen kitchen and how in the world you managed to get a full ride to university by being a caddy. So lots of good stuff. But before we get into that,
sometimes I think desperation can be highly underrated sometimes.
That is very true. We're going to talk about that. But before we get into that, I want to take you even further back into high school. One of your wrestling matches when, for the first time in your life, you saw some kind of glimpse of the Zen mindset and your wrestling opponents. So can you share a little bit about that story and how it got you into, fascinated into Zen mind?
Yeah, I think, I just wrote about that the other day, that I noticed, I couldn't help, well, a couple of things. I mean, one, it was funny that, this was central New Jersey, and there was a team that was in the town next to ours that, J.P. Stevens High School in Edison, New Jersey. And they were just consistently one of the best teams in the state. And it was striking that when we would be in a match against them, that our team came out before the match like most wrestling teams did. We were all kind of rah and this kind of attempting to psych out the other team through our energy and this kind of macho wrestling feeling. And these guys, they very differently, they walked out quietly, and there was some sense of stillness about them. And they their uniforms were black, and they pretty much, as I recall, all had shaved heads.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking when I was in high school, this is the team I wanted to be on. And it was funny many years later finding myself in a Zen monastery where people were black and shaved their heads, and there was all this stillness. But the other thing that I noticed in high school wrestling was that there was something a little odd, a little different about the very best wrestlers. That I noticed that the wrestlers who were good, really wanted to win, really didn't want to lose, had tremendous, energy and motivation. But there was something peculiar about, I thought, the best wrestlers, the state champions. They seemed less motivated about winning, and they seemed less fearful about losing. And again, that was just my, I never had that conversation with any of them. It was just my, what I observed and my own intuition. And I felt like, and I remember wondering, like, what would it feel like to not be so caught by the desire to win and the fear of losing. And I remember once an experience that I had was being ahead in a wrestling match against an opponent. And I can remember kind of clamping down, like sort of holding on, running out the clock in order to win the match, which I did. And I remember walking off the mat, feeling like crap
Wow.
and feeling like I didn't I didn't really give it my all. I didn't really do the dance,
Yeah.
and in some way there was something like, did it really matter that much that I won if I didn't really let myself really give it my best? So those were various. It's just a few of the many lessons in high school wrestling.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because that's an insight I hear over and over again talking to people like you, is that success and winning, even if they may sound incredible and may sound it's like this huge goal in front of you, but if you haven't truly given it your all, like if you feel like there's still this gap left between what you're doing and what you could be doing, then people feel unfulfilled, right? Because success alone is not enough. You also got to feel like there's some sense of mastery, right? There's some sense of I did something that actually like pushed me outside of my comfort zone. It actually forced me
Yeah.
to level up. And I think that's something that people often overlook when they're so focused on winning or losing, right? They forget that like the whole purpose of especially sports, right, is not to just win some medals, right? It's to actually become a better version of yourself and develop yourself. And I think that's such an important point there.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a great thing about um, and I think that sports and athletes and mindfulness practitioners and meditators. There's in some way I think of meditation as kind of a sport in a
Yeah.
certain way, and I think of a sport as a kind of meditation as well.
Do you mean in the sort of approach they take to it and sort of just focusing on mastery rather than or rather the process of mastery rather than some outcome, or how do you mean
Well,
that?
in a few ways, I think they are what they have in common is they engage the full body and mind, right? So they meditation and any sport, it's not just you know it's not just thinking about something. It's not just coming up with some idea. And those cognitive sports. Those are wonderful as well. But these are more body. This is like really using one's whole body and mind. Um, and they pretty much involved with engaging with others in some way. And yeah, and I think um, they push you to some edge of the edge of the known and the unknown. That to me uh, it's funny. I've been talking a lot. I've been about this what I think of as this process of seeking and finding, and that um, in some way, like in the world of meditation, uh, often you're instructed to not have a goal or to let go of any sense of goal. But I think the reality is that there's some goal that brings you to the cushion, or brings you to the seat. You're not just sort of finding yourself. No, there may be many different layers of motivation, but um, but I think what's interesting, and again, I think this is similar uh, to sports as well, is that uh, once you're in it, part of you need to have the courage to let go of whatever you thought that goal was. And I think it's similar to if you're a tennis player or a golfer or any sport. In order to improve, you kind of need to let go of the way that you're doing it now, and
Yeah.
and that's hard, right? There's kind of a mental and physical practice of of letting go, um, and being in that unknown space. And to me, this is I think of it as it's frame in between searching and finding, right? So we start out thinking that we're looking for something. In the world of meditation, it might be, reducing our stress, or communicating better, or enlightenment, any of those things. But we need to let it, whatever it is, we need to let it go, and and um, and then we might, and that's where the learning and the discovery, I think, takes place, in that space, that kind of letting go space. And then, there's also some sense of discovery, or some sense of finding what did we learn, how am I transformed, whether it's as a meditator or as an athlete. And again, I think that's the ongoing process. And I think that's ongoing sort of human process, because we're constantly changing, our circumstances are changing. So this sense, we yearn, I think we humans, we yearn for predictability and stability, but it's not the universe that we live in. So good luck with that.
Good luck with that. Yes, indeed. But this rings so true to me, what you're saying here. And to keep using your sports metaphor, I've been running competitively for the last 8 years or so, like pretty much every single day, right? And it really started out, like you said, like with really this intense focus on goals, right? I wanted to win races, I wanted to set records, break my PRs, all of that. But the more I started, I kept running year after year, the more I realized that it's not about that. Right? Because all of that, it may sound cool, but it's not actually the thing that you're after, right? It's like this daily process, just doing the work and getting better, and seeking mastery, and actually finding also enjoyment in the moment and in the process, right? In the day-to-day business, rather than, hey, in like 6 months from now, when I win this race, then I'm gonna be happy, right? It doesn't work that way. And I think that's so important to realize, also the journey and the power of that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we need those goals, so it's not like, oh, as I said, even this image of what brings us to the cushion, or what what brings you to running, sometimes as a writer, it's a funny paradox that it's helpful for me to feel like, oh, I'm actually writing a book here. This is going to turn into a book. But if the writing I do needs to be book worthy, that's horrible. Like having to have book worthy writing is just such a impediment to my own sense of enjoyment and freedom and creativity. So it's this real funny paradox of I think having goals, having structure, being motivated in that way. I need those things, and I think most people do. But I think what gets harder, what's a little bit more nuanced, is the need to let it go, the need to really let it go. Like, and that not, it's not like, oh, I'm, just like, no, like let it go and see how that goes.
Yeah, I think it's so important. There's really, on the one hand, having those goals, right? Because they provide us with structure, right? They provide us with clarity and focus around what we want to do, and at the same time, letting go of the end result, right? Letting go of the external stuff and just doing our best, right? Is really, I think, the best way to go about this if you want to be first successful and then also happy in the moment.
Yeah. So I think that's the I mentioned this seeking and finding, and so I think, to me, the surprise element of it is that it's not about finding some end goal, but about finding an appreciation and joy in the process, whatever it is. Like, and that's and cultivating. I think that's part of, I think it takes uh, ongoing practice and ongoing support um, to actually live that. It's not so easy. You know, it's not so easy to appreciate the process, appreciate, you know, one of my ongoing instructions if I'm leading a meditation is, you know, what is it like? What is it like to be here? What is it like to be alive right now? And without trying to change anything, without trying to make it different, to, you know, to without wanting some different state of mind, but this state of mind, what is it? and and uh, and is it possible to just appreciate and accept and be there for what is, as opposed to wanting something different?
Yeah, I think that's so important because so many times, even I myself find myself sort of arguing with reality, right? And what I mean that is we see reality as it is, we feel our emotions as they are, but we want something different, right? We want to feel happier, we want to feel more excited, we want to feel more energetic in that moment. So we kind of argue, right? And that oftentimes what I find is it actually pulls us down, right? So trying to oftentimes, argue with those negative emotions actually, pulls us down, rather than if we just accepted it, hey, this is how it is right now, and just
Yeah.
stayed with it, right?
Yeah, and right, but then there's a powerful and yet, right, and yet, um, we have some big problems that we need to solve, right? So my attitude about climate change, as an example, it isn't like, oh well, you know, just have to accept it.
Yeah.
Like no, we screwed up.
You
We
gotta do
screwed up.
something, yeah.
We screwed up here. We need to do something, and we need to take action. What can we do? You know, the same is true with um, you know, racism and inequality and violence. It's like so it's so part of it though is, I think it's hard to accept what is, right. It's easier to, either to pretend that it doesn't really exist, that these things don't really exist, or that someone else is going to take care of them. So it takes, again, I think, this accepting what is stuff means, feeling the pain of what is, right. and and that's hard. Like if we were to really, if we really looked at what we've done to this planet, we would be really we'd be really suffering. It's a travesty what we've done to this planet when you look at the garbage in the oceans, and the microplastic everywhere, and the chemicals everywhere around us, and all of the, now a lot of it I think was done unintentionally. A lot of it was done before we understood, you know, uh, the downside of chemicals. Now, and a lot of it was done with greed, greed and the short-term desire for wealth and success was also a big part of it. But here we are, like, so it's like, now what? And so I think there is something profound about leaning in, feeling and seeing what is, uh, feeling it, really feeling it, and at the same time, even letting go of all that as well, and then coming up with, well, what do we do? What, and I think this is, for most of us, also on a much smaller scale, like, how do we live our lives? Like if you find yourself, whether it's addicted or biased or angry or whatever, however you find yourself, to really find yourself and to really feel those feelings and accept them, and figure out how to make things, how to make positive change in our life. So again, it's this like, I don't want to leave you with, oh yeah, it's like whatever, like, yeah, just I remember once I was teaching a workshop in which someone said, oh yeah, I get I get what your message is. Your real message is, you should really tune in, and whatever the universe wants. And I kind of recoiled and said, no, I'm not a whatever the universe wants kind of guy. I'm like, write the freaking business plan.
Right? Just do the stuff you want, right?
Come up with, yes, there is, again, it's both, right? It's like, don't be fighting against what the universe wants, or don't be fighting against the deeper strands of your own intuition. Yeah. So again, it's rather paradoxical, because as a Zen teacher, one of the I feel like one of the core practices in Zen is letting go of attainment, moving from attainment to non-attainment. But I think that's a starting point for solving real problems.
100%. And so this was actually the perfect sort of segue into your book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader. Because what you touched upon here is really rule number 4, practice number 4, connecting to your pain. And I think this is such an important point, because I think especially today in this world, it's so easy to avoid pain, to run away from it, to hide from it, or whether it's social media, whether it's watching Netflix, whether it's taking drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, to just kind of forget about the pain for the moment. But as we all know, over the long run, this isn't really useful if you actually want to learn to live a better life and learn to get in a state of happiness again. So what is maybe one thing that you could tell people to do if they really want to, they have this pain in their lives? How can they sort of learn to transform that?
Yeah, this was I think one of the real brilliances of the historical Buddha's teaching 2,500 years ago, which is that there's pain and difficulty within. It's part of the human condition. It's embedded in us, partly. There's the obvious things that we don't always get what we want, and sometimes we get what we don't want. And then there's just that everything is always changing, and we're always changing, and we are, if we're lucky, there's old age, sickness, and death, if we're lucky, So, and then these practices, that he came up with, these way of being in the world to transform pain into well-being, into happiness, into satisfaction. And that so it's not that we're not pushing it away, we're not pretending it's not there, but it's this constant practice of acknowledging and transforming again and again. And again, it's I think it's interesting. It's like the practice of even appreciating ourselves, and appreciating even the things that are challenging and difficult. And again, it's very much connected. I feel like we made a leap there, which I just want to underscore, because practice number 3 in my 7 practices is don't be an expert, which is a lot like what we were just talking about, this sense of letting go of being right, or letting go of thinking that we have the answers, and developing a real sense of curiosity about things, about ourselves, about each other. And those 2 practices, I think, that practice of don't be an expert and connecting to your pain really go together. They go together really well. You know, they're very similar kinds of mindsets.
For sure. And to me, what this comes back to is, what do you build your sense of self-esteem and your identity around, right? Because especially this point around not being an expert, what it means is, well, you may objectively be an expert, right? The goal is objectively to master whatever it is that you're doing. But in your mind, you always want to stay the beginner, right? In the mind, you always want to have this white belt mentality of always wanting to improve, always wanting to learn, always wanting to get better in some kind of way, and never really feeling like, hey, I've mastered it all, right? Because that's the end of everything.
Yeah, well, yes. And, you know, I often get pushback about this, you know, don't be an expert. So I have to clarify that, of course, I want my surgeon or my car mechanic, I want them to be really good. I'd like them to be experts in their fields. But there's two things about that. One is when I talk about, you know, don't be an expert, it's in the realm of relationship and communication and our humanity, that there's no way we're going to be experts in relationships. And even the surgeon or car mechanic, if things don't go as according to what's expected, I want them to have incredibly flexible minds and be willing to let go of what their idea of how things are supposed to go. So it's again, it's interesting. You know, our language is so dualistic. You know that you're expert or not an expert, and right and wrong, and pain and no pain. So I think we need to be a little bit forgiving of ourselves when it comes to, you know, how easily we get caught by the duality of our language.
Yes, for sure. And I feel like there's this distinction between the skill set of an expert and feeling like you're an expert, right? It's like you say, you're a neurosurgeon, you want them to objectively have the skill set of an expert, right? But at the same time, feel like they're a beginner, feel like they can always learn, have that, you know, mental capacity to just go a different way and learn new things. So I think that's really important. And really what allows you to bring to life these true practices, right? Don't be an expert and connect to your pain is the first two that you mentioned, meaning loving the work and actually doing the work, right? So can you share with us a little bit about that and what that means?
Yeah. Yeah, to me, you know, the first practice, like in some way, all of them are within this, right? Loving the work of being human, loving what does it mean? And this was really, you know, I've been thinking a lot about, you know, my own sort of inspiration, motivation, aha. Again, there are many different points, but one point was reading the book. I was 21 years old when I read Toward a Psychology of Being by Abraham Maslow. And it's funny, people think about Maslow as this hierarchy of needs, and yeah, that was really good work. But he did all this work on, like, that book was, to me, he was really asking the question, why is it that some humans are qualitatively more developed, emotionally more developed? They seem that he noticed some people seem to be happier, but also sadder. That it wasn't just that they were happy all the time, but there was the emotional depth and range and ability to be present and ability to be connected to themselves and to others. And it's like, I remember reading that as a 21-year-old. I said, these are great questions. I've never thought of that. And and if I do think about it, I am so undeveloped. I'm over on the other end of that scale. Like, I have no idea what I'm feeling or what anybody. And it's just like, and it was this this wow about yeah, why isn't everybody doing this work? Why isn't everyone like uh, I just think it just seemed obvious that this was essential in not only for my own life and own well-being, but when I looked at the insanity around me of how people were living their lives and how we were producing food, how we were treating the planet, like, oh, it all starts with working in this realm of becoming more full, appreciative, connected, loving humans. And so to me, this is the first practice, which is to love the work of being human, and also the work of helping others, the work of compassion, which I think, again, it's just completely embedded in our own, because we're just, again, and this is, funny, jumping around, practice 6 is depend on others, because we are part of loving the work is seeing how we depend on others much more for the obvious material things, but even for our own identities, our own sense of who we are.
100%. I want to dive a little bit deeper in number 6 in a minute. But what you just said really blew me away about really learning to be an outstanding human being. Because for our listeners here right now, this is literally what this podcast is about going deeper into your own human psyche, learning to understand yourself more, learning to really master your own mind and really become a more well-rounded human being so that you can live a happier and better life. And so this is really what it's about. And you mentioned Maslow, and there's this quote that I absolutely love, which is he said, "What one can be, one must be."
Mm-hmm.
I really love that because I think it speaks to this idea that you have to develop yourself into the person that you can be, because that's the only way to really, truly, I think, at the end of your life, when you look back, you don't have any regrets, right? And I think regret comes when you look back and you realize, I could have done more to become more. Right. I think this is so important. This really speaks to what you're saying here about learning to love the work of developing yourself into someone that you're not yet today.
I love the Maslow quote, and I also, as you were saying that, I thought, and and we'll never quite get there either.
Yeah. I think this is an important point because mental mastery, it may sound like, hey, you're going to reach this end point in your life, but the reality is it's a constant pursuit. There's no end goal, there's no end state. It's just about getting better every single day of your life for the rest of your life until the day you die. And that, I think, is the purpose of everybody's life, is to just see how far they can go and how far they can get in developing themselves internally, more so than externally, right? I think this is so important.
Yeah.
But let's.
I should know this quote by heart, so I apologize that I'm going to do a really rough paraphrase.
That's all right.
This is the founder of Zen Buddhism in Japan in the 13th century, Dogen, who was a incredibly prolific writer, scholar, and yeah, he really wrestled his whole life with these issues about kind of seeking and finding, and stepping into enlightenment, and the fact that we never reach enlightenment. And there's a quote from one of his essays where he says something like, when we constantly realize that there's something lacking, this is enlightenment. When we feel that we've reached enlightenment, or when we feel that there's nothing lacking, this is delusion.
Love that. I think to this point, you're never gonna be the expert, right? You're never going to be perfect in anything that you do, and to think that you are almost disqualifies you as like you say, delusional, right? So I think so important. Now, let's go back to what you mentioned before, practice number 6, depending on others. And you mentioned how important this is, right? Not just for material stuff, not just for financial stuff, but also for our own well-being. So how can we learn to truly depend on other people and build this interconnectedness in our lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of uh, the book, it's 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, and the context that I address, a lot of these practices in the context of work and the context of working within a team or leading team. So there's all of that, and I think this it's just so obvious, right? If you're on a team, whether you're leading the team or a member of the team, you're just so depending on others, and part of the practice is to recognize that, and part of that is to listen, is to really be curious about who are these others. I mean, again, so often in the work world, there's such a sense of protecting our particular uh, piece of the property, or our own ego, or being the smartest. And there's really interesting research. I talk about some research study that Google did years ago. This one is called Google Aristotle, where they wanted to know what it was that made great teams. And again, in some way, what they discovered was that great teams depend on each other. They depend on each other for creating a culture of trust, a culture of safety within that team, which is the opposite of, right, the kind of more egoistic and self-protection. And again, I think whether it's in our work lives or in all parts of our lives, in some way our families are like a team. If we play sports, we're on teams. So much of what we do is this becoming skillful at this kind of interdependence, right? So we need to, how do we function? What's our role? But how are we functioning in a skillful, compassionate way within teams?
I think this is so important. And I've really realized this in my own life, which is when I work with people that I consider friends, right? Or I first, take a time to actually build relationships and build friendships before I dive into, team projects. That makes things so much easier, right? Because as you said, that allows everyone to sort of let down their guard, right? To stop trying to protect themselves, to stop trying to protect their ego and their status, and instead just truly collaborate and really depend on each other and trust on each other. And I think that's so important, that when you're starting out with a new team, and whether it's sports or business or wherever else in your life, family, that you actually take the time first to really deeply connect on a human level. Ask, like, who are you really? What matters to you? What values are important to you, right? How do you want to interact? And then once you've got those things clarified, then you can really start working and collaborating and actually maximizing the whole efficiency part of it.
Yeah, and I think it's worth recognizing it's hard. It's really
100%.
Right? That collaboration is hard. Cynicism and mistrust are easy. We can see that. I mean, it becomes really obvious in our political world, but in most companies, partnerships are hard, and solving problems together is really difficult. It's one of the things I do a lot of co-teaching. I'm almost, not always, but whenever I'm up in front of the room in a company or in a public setting, I really like standing next to someone, and it's just such a great learning. I've learned so much from people who I've co-taught with, and I've been incredibly lucky to have found myself in front of the room, standing next to just like really brilliant people, and I've often been awestruck, and of course my own imposter syndrome can kick in.
Yeah.
What am I doing next to this person? Or someone in the audience will ask a question, and the person that I'm standing next to will give a brilliant answer. And I'm like, wow, where did they come up with that? and it's been, it's been great being the, I think for many years I was the co-pilot, where I felt like I was the person, people that I were co-teaching with were a lot more experienced than I was, but I got to be up there. And then at some point, I remember standing up in front of the room and think, oh, I'm now the pilot. I'm now kind of mentoring this person who's next to me. And then what's beautiful is when we're both the pilots. We're both completely co-piloting this plane. Working. It's a really interesting dance and a real interesting, I think, expression of depending on what's interesting. And you see, you're not just depending on each other, but everyone in the room is we're all in this together. We're all completely codependent on each other. And
yeah, I think that's so important, right? Because like you said, there's this codependency, right? And also there's this sort of natural process of, first of all, being the mentee, right? Being the person, the co-pilot, as you say, right? The person that's just learning and growing and developing themselves, and that may feel that imposter syndrome, right? When they look at these superstars in their fields, right? And I feel like I can never get there. But then as you just keep putting yourself out there over time, right? Over the years as they go by, what you're going to find is at some point, you're going to be left there in the cockpit all alone, right? The co-pilot's gone and you're going to figure out a way to somehow land that plane safely by yourself, right? I think that's so important for people to realize, especially those impatient ones, that's like your time is going to come at some point if you keep putting in the work.
But it's interesting, I think, I kept learning over and over again, like even when I was standing up there in front of the room with these brilliant co-teachers, I can remember afterwards, saying to someone who was there that, like, gee, that was interesting. I learned a lot, and it was hard at times being next to someone who was that intelligent. And they would look at me and saying, like, Marc, don't you bring something else, right?
Yeah.
Like yes, you might not. Like if I was with a neuroscientist who was talking about brain science in a way that was not my education, but I was able to. I think I was often underestimating what I was bringing. That it's easy to have that kind of a comparative mind and imposter syndrome and underappreciate whatever it is we're bringing. So it's kind of it's this interesting ongoing process, because actually when I would then do some debriefing with my brilliant co-teachers, they would feel like they wish they had answered questions better. So it's just, again, I think there's something it's an interesting edge of I think there's something healthy about wanting to be better, wanting to do it better, and at the same time to appreciating what is, and not getting too worked up in the comparative mind or the imposter syndrome, and to recognize those things, and but not to get too hooked by them.
For sure, and I think that self-awareness here is really so key. Now, Marc, I want you to take us back to the moment in college, and you mentioned this before. You read Abraham Maslow, right? You sort of expanded your mind to the possibility of actually living, and then you decide to go to monastery, not just for a month or two, but for 10 years. So how do you make that radical shift in your life, and what were some of the things that you learned in that time that must have been truly completely different from usual freshman in college, right? Totally different life.
It's funny, it wasn't quite that big a leap. So I I decided that I was going to take a 1-year leave of absence from college. So that was step one.
Yeah.
So I left college, went to San Francisco, and was part of a small community that was a meditation community. It was there that I learned about the San Francisco Zen Center. Came across a book called the Tassajara Bread Book, and started baking bread. But there was something about the spirit of that book that it wasn't just about baking bread, it was about baking yourself. It was about developing yourself. And it also had a sense of humor to it. And it also had a real depth to it. And at the time I was working downtown San Francisco in an office job, and I would take the bus from where I was living, and every day the bus would go right by this the San Francisco Zen Center building. And one day I got off the bus, big mistake,
Cost you 10 years of your life.
Yeah, it was actually, I walked into the Zen Center, and then I really felt like, this is worth I think this is going to be my next place where I'm going to live and study. And I think,
wow.
There was even a voice that said, I think this place would be worth 10 years of my life. And,
wow.
Yeah, it was just, I think a combination of the aesthetics, the cleanliness, and the beautiful smells, and the beautiful people, but also there was a kind of spaciousness. Like, I remember walking in, asking about the schedule, and basically it was like, we sit meditation every morning at 5:30. If you want to come join us, the door's open. If we never see you again, good luck. And I kind of liked that, and little by little, I started to become, started to sit with the community, and at some point I started living there and working there, and it just was a really good fit for me as a terms of meditation practice and working with teachers and studying. And one of the big surprises was how important work practice was, and that I kept getting asked to take on different leadership roles, which was a big surprise for me. It was not at all how I saw myself. And then, kind of fast forward several years, I found myself running a Zen monastery kitchen.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, I was the director of this monastery. Tassajara turns into a kind of a resort and kind of conference center in the summertime, and it was really those two roles were pivotal, and it just was a whole different relationship with work, and the sense of integrating my full practice, my full kind of love of the practice of self-awareness into working with people, and into making stuff, and into getting stuff done. And that led me to go back and finish my undergraduate degree and get an MBA degree, and then start a few companies since then. So
yeah, I think there's such a fascinating journey that you go from this really mindfulness-based approach, right? And you take it back into quote unquote real life, right? And you start applying it to work, and you start applying it to just living this normal life again. So for people that, don't have 10 years maybe of their lives to spend in this monastery, right? To go through this whole process, what would you say is one big takeaway that you could share with them to really learn to take this Zen mindset and actually apply it to their normal lives?
I remember leading a one-day meditation retreat for a group of Google engineers. And these this group, they had done a fair amount of, they had been meditating for many years, but they had never done like a one day sitting where we pretty much spent the day sitting meditation, sitting and walking and sitting and walking. It was but there was some real depth to it. And there's something very special for anyone that has never done like a one day sitting or a multiple day sitting. I just can't strongly enough recommend it. But at the end of that day, a lot of people, they were just like transformed, and they were like, wow, we had no idea this is what meditation is. There's a sense of connection that they had, I think, with themselves, and a kind of a depth and a lightness. And the question that came up was, do we need to go live in a monastery? Because this was really profound, having this kind of time. And my response, and that's why I'm kind of how I'm answering your question. No, you can. It's pretty great. If you can manage to, take a chunk of time. But my response was, make your home your monastery. Develop, carve out some corner of your house where you can sit regularly, where you can write, where you can study. Lead a monastic life, even if it's for a half hour a day, but make a little monastery in your own space. And these one day sittings or these multiple day sittings, find a way to make that part of your life. So I think having a regular, a daily practice, doing retreats, finding some other people to sit with and study with. I think these are all within anyone's reach who wants to. But it's actually, this is the practice number 2, doing the work.
Yeah.
It's actually having a regular practice, sitting with others, doing retreats. But so to me, these things, I think, can't be replaced or underestimated. I just did a half day sitting here in my house I do a weekly meditation group here in Mill Valley called Mill Valley Zen. And I find, like, wow, just sitting for a half day, like, it's almost like cheating, because I feel like I did so much from just, spending 3 hours just stopping and sitting and walking. And it's just pretty great, I have to say. Yeah, I think we all need to, I think of it as kind of returning to the well of practice. And then we have to get out there and back into the noisy, challenging world, but bringing that well with us as much as we can muster.
Yes, I love that. I think that literally the key to life is having some kind of ritual, some kind of practice that you can put into your life every single day, right? It doesn't need to be 3 hours, right? But having something at least, especially in the morning before you start your day, to really ground yourself and get yourself ready for the demands that the world is going to place upon you is so important.
All right, guys, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you gained some valuable ideas, tips, tools, tricks, mindsets, belief systems that will hopefully inspire you to take your life to the next level. At the end of the day, guys, it's all about application. The only thing that's going to set you apart tomorrow from where you are today is how much action you take with those ideas that you gained. And so I really want to challenge you at this point to, not just listen to this passively, to not just consume this, passively just think about other things, but to really take those lessons, take those ideas that you just gained and start applying them to your lives, to really start taking action and sprinting towards those goals and those dreams that you have in your life. Now, guys, at this point, I want to ask you for a huge favor. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider heading over to iTunes and leaving a review, as that helps me really grow the show and reach more people, impact even more people around the world. If you have a family member, friend, a loved one maybe, that you think could benefit from this content, please consider, sharing it with them, forwarding to them, as that helps us really build a community of like-minded people that are all about maxing out their lives. Now, guys, with that being said, thanks so much for tuning in today. I really, really appreciate it. Stay strong and see you tomorrow.